Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk to everybody today. I've got a page of notes in front of me and lots of ideas, and we'll take those questions. Yep.
Yes, maybe just to kind of help us all have like the context and a lot of where some of your insights going to come from. Can you just share a little bit about Globia and kind of
Sure.
who the clients are and what are
Mhm.
maybe some of the top projects that you're working on right now?
Yeah, you bet. So Globia is a little content marketing agency, and I work with enterprise level clients in the 10 to $60 million range of business, building their content programs. And then, so it's strategy, planning, and then doing the actual content development with people on my team. In nearly every case, they want to run a newsletter. If they don't, I work to convince them to run a newsletter because I think that that is one of the best owned channels for talking to your customers. And, I'll respond to Nicole's questions, but that's basically what I do. I build and run content programs for at the enterprise level.
Yes, which is why we're going to get a lot of good insight of things that work, things that don't. That's the nice thing of agencies. You get a lot of viewpoints and, you're not so myopic on just one industry. But to
Mhm.
kick us off, we have to start with, at the end of the day, why a newsletter? What is the objective of a newsletter? I think I don't want to lead the witness too much, but there are a lot of bad assumptions. There are a lot of bad newsletters out there,
Yes.
but like so many bad news. It's just like expected at this
Yeah.
point. And I think we've kind of missed like what they actually do, how they fit into a strategy. And so, um, it's how do you think about it or how do you coach people and where a newsletter fits into a content or demand strategy?
Absolutely. I'm going to call it short to mid form thought leadership content in a channel that you own. So the idea is that when a lot of brands are doubling down on social media, that's rented land. But if you're able to grow a subscriber list, and if you have access to people who literally raise their hands to hear from you, then you can personalize messages and build relationships through a channel that you own that won't get taken from you. And it is a great place to provide useful information, provide bottom of the funnel content like proof that you solve problems,
Mhm.
and drive a call to action as simple as reply to us. And people can easily hit reply. There's no friction there to hit reply.
I mean, already there's so many good things in what you said in such a succinct way, but I love thinking about that short, mid, long form content. Think
Mhm.
sometimes that gets missed on, it's not just what the channel is, but which channel needs what type of content
Yep,
to
yep.
actually engage. And that owned audience piece,
Mhm.
Google just had their big keynote yesterday.
Yeah,
Um,
and
th th
stocks dropped. Yeah.
exactly. There's a lot of change. And I do think that's something that all marketers need to be thinking about is a lot of times we rely on paid ads, organic. Those aren't dead. They're changing, they're evolving. You maybe have to sharpen your tools in that. But thinking about things you own at the end of the day that can't be taken away, I think is a really important thing that more marketers need to start thinking about.
Right.
And then
Really
using
important.
those channels to build your own audience. Like that is a great method, to get in there.
Right.
Um, and your point
When
about,
done
oh,
well,
go
when
ahead.
done well, which we're going to talk about. But if you're
Yes.
using newsletters to be salesy or to promote new features, I mean, sparingly, like butter, just a little bit.
A little goes a long way.
Little goes a long way of those types of emails. But I am talking about useful, insightful content that can help your customers with a distinct problem.
Well, it's a relationship. I mean, if they're raising your hand and you have to kind of carry that responsibility with some weight as a marketer who owns your newsletter or any email, and think of it not just as pumping out people to or pumping out company kind of self-centered
Right.
news to this audience, but thinking of it as a two-way street. And it's one of the only channels that someone can actually immediately turn around and respond to.
Right.
You can have that conversation on a social channel for sure, but thinking about it more as a relationship builder versus let me yell at you about how cool we are,
Yell
I
at
think
you.
changes the
Right.
game.
Yeah. And Jeff is cracking me up, loves butter, and actually thought that Idaho was a CIA project.
I know, Jeff, if you're not following the chat, Jeff's comments alone, I would pull it up and have it to the side because it's great. Um,
I have a checklist here at the right time, Nicole, that says, how to do a B2B newsletter. So we'll get to
yeah, I mean, let's start. That is the
Okay.
thing is if I was gonna say, okay, so we know maybe what not to do. Like, don't just throw product
Yeah,
self-centered messaging in. But then how do you think about what is the right content to put in a
sure.
newsletter?
Let's start with that.
Yeah.
So I suspect that most of you have heard the concept zero click content. And my approach to newsletters is a riff off of that theme. So you are not using your newsletter to send people back to your blog through like 10 links to your blog or links to your services page. And you've all
That
seen
is the
those.
worst newsletter. Here are the
Yes.
4 articles
Yes.
we did this month. Check them out.
It's the worst newsletter. So the concept of zero-click content is to provide the useful information, provide the insight in the newsletter itself. A link or two in the newsletter is okay, but you don't want to confuse with multiple calls to action because a link is a call to action.
Yeah.
And think when you're writing them about, have I given useful information? Am I helping them solve a problem instead of, am I just trying to drive traffic to my site? So think about it in those terms. Think about providing the meat instead of just, a summary of the blog post. Here, go to that blog post. Provide some meat in the newsletter
Yeah.
in mid form, not more than, let's see, 700, I'm going to say 500 words is a long newsletter, not longer than that. So they're well
Mhm.
shorter than blog posts, but it's longer than a social post. You're able to explore your idea in more depth than social, but maybe in less than a blog post or a pillar page like that.
When you think about such a cluttered inbox, which I'm sure we can talk about, how do you stand out in a cluttered inbox or
Yeah,
noisy inbox? But if someone can
subject
open
line.
it up, literally get something of value out of that first intro paragraph, and then one that potentially earns
Hmm,
their trust to want to keep going in and maybe clicking on some of your content or engaging with that, but they actually got something out of it and then they delete it and move on. That's still a win. You
that's a
can't
win.
track it. We'll talk about
Hmm,
metrics and
hmm,
how to think about it, but that still is a brand relationship win.
right. You said something that I will underscore here, earn. Through content, you earn the right to do business. You don't do business. I mean, you don't do business until you earn the right to talk about business. And it's a bad news to ask somebody to marry you before even the first, second, or 10th date. So through newsletters, you're earning the right to talk about the business. And I think about the Japanese model for doing business where you golf and you have a meal and
Hmm.
you provide value before you start doing business. And that's kind of the philosophy here.
Well, that's really where content marketing got started was, oh, if
Mhm.
people are looking for things online, I mean, this
Mhm.
idea, HubSpot, you think about, I mean, content marketing's probably always existed, but when it really became a function, something people monetized and made as a function of marketing.
Right, like a division, like a department and a team. Mhm.
Exactly. That
Budget.
was the thing was let's go add value through content
Mhm.
to earn people's business. Of course, over the years, it's become very noisy. It's become a little
Mhm.
commoditized, and we looked for the most efficient, easy way just to pump out content. And sometimes I think you lose the actual goal behind the content of why
Right,
you're putting it out.
right. Yeah.
So what are some of the other tips on your checklist? Let's
Yeah,
start
you
there.
bet. I will, we talked to, here's my paper. I'm kicking it old school and I printed something. So as I talked about short form content with the goal to teach, inform, inspire, native content. Frequency and consistency. So consistency is very important. It's not just, hey, I had these thoughts and I'm sending a newsletter. You want to do monthly on Tuesdays or whatever, 9 a.m. So ideally you have 2 or 3 or 4 issues written and scheduled in your tool so you are respecting a cadence. And that's how customers know they're going to hear from you. You're regular, you're in their inbox once a month. Please send them from a real person. You see them from like marketing at X
This was a
company.
question we got. Can you send it from the business or does it have to be a person?
I'm begging you to have it be from a person, a real name. And then when they reply, it can go to that person if you have a low number of subscribers or to a monitored inbox. So the person doesn't have to get inundated with replies. And there aren't a great deal of replies, but it needs to be from a person and there needs to be a capability to reply when they send a response. So, naming the newsletter and the subject line are both really important. The subject line, use best practices to have an attention grabbing subject line. But your newsletter, please don't have it be called monthly newsletter or monthly insights. You need to say in the name of the newsletter what it is you're going to cover every week. My newsletter name is Content Simplified. And I think from that name, you know what I'm going to be talking about in the newsletter. And then I have a subject line that pertains to the topic. But name your newsletter in a way that's valuable to your audience so they know exactly what they're getting from you. Write to you, the customer.
Mm,
Check your we language at the door. Okay. Again, if you're going to describe your services and your product, it would be like at the end. It's a PS. It's a by the way.
mhm.
But the body of your content should be you focused, customer focused, your problems, your pains. Formatting, and I feel like I'm going pretty fast.
No, this is great.
It should be skimmable. It should not be a wall of text. Think about the way that people format good social posts, short sentences and bullets. It doesn't need to be that extreme, but make sure it's skimmable. Use headers like you would in a blog post. It's kind of a blend of best practices between social and a blog post. Use headers, short paragraphs, use bullets so somebody can boom, 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 check out the key points. Yeah. Um, Add images,
Skimmability is really important. And we'll talk about that
skimmability.
with metrics, but
That's yeah. Add images and videos for bonus points, but don't sweat it. You are focused on it's written textual content. You are focused on providing value through words.
well, sometimes
Videos,
the more you add to, it impacts deliverability.
deliverability is something we can talk about too, a really great point. Yeah. If you're starting a newsletter, don't sweat the multimedia content. Don't sweat the links and the images. It's nice to have a limit image. Use your brand colors for headers and footers and such, but just don't sweat that stuff. Um, I also recommend that my clients publish it on LinkedIn as a newsletter also. So you wouldn't necessarily send one out on Tuesday and publish it on LinkedIn on that same Tuesday, but stagger them 3 or 4 weeks. And that's just because it's a larger audience, well beyond your subscriber list. And you can have a call to action to subscribe to the actual newsletter. It's just broadening your reach and extending your message in different places. And there's always value in that. And make no assumption that people are reading your content in both places. That's just not the case. So it's quite a low lift to publish also on LinkedIn, and I do recommend that. Yeah. I'm looking at Jeff's question, which will point to my comprehend. Yeah. Yeah. You can segment your list, Jeff. So say you have a subscriber list of 1,000 people and you've noticed that half of them are CEOs and half of them are like tacticians, individual contributors, or half are marketing leaders and half are product or SaaS product people. You can segment your list and send a version of that email to those two different lists. That's a little heavier lift, but right, if you have like trends in your audience, that's worth doing.
You can also, I think, segment on buyer journey. So maybe client, someone who's already in the sales process, maybe someone who's still that top of funnel, very educational, and can adjust the type of education that they need in those moments too. I think if they have if you know them better, or again, like if they're working with you, Lee, and you're driving their content strategy, hopefully you don't need to reinforce why content strategy is important. They probably are going to want more specifics. Actual examples are going to be more helpful when you already know what the foundation of they're all a little more similar versus the person who just signed up and you have absolutely no idea their sophistication level.
Right. And you'll
Um,
also, yeah, exactly. You'll also have that the mix of your subscribers between like Gmail addresses, so personal emails and corporate. And I would say for business purposes, it's definitely preferable to be talking with those people who are using and have their corporate email addresses. So when you're segmenting an audience, that's something to consider is the domains that they're using. Yeah. Oh, you saw that. Good. I accidentally sending my comments to hosts.
that's okay. No, totally fine. Um,
Okay.
Well, and I'm so glad you did bring up LinkedIn because I think it's an underutilized tool. And so email newsletters are not the only newsletters anymore. And so thinking about that is important. But as you think about repurposing content, let's start with one, but of course there are others. I feel like a lot of times people think about, okay, what's my editorial calendar for the month or the quarter or the week, however often you're doing a newsletter and saying, okay, what other content am I doing?
Right.
Let's just put that, let's just figure out how that fits into a newsletter. And that's great and totally something that you should do. But how do you think about making sure it isn't just, well, let me take the links of this webinar we did, in our newsletter. We did this webinar, go check it out. Here's a link. Here are the 4 top blog posts of the month. How do you think about repurposing so that it really fits into some of those best practices you've talked about already?
Good. This has two components. The first is that your topic strategy, your content strategy is all of your content pieces. So once you develop your 5 or 6 pillars, the themes that you're going to talk about, that's what you talk about in your newsletter and your social and your blog. So you begin to be known for your 5 topics.
Mhm.
And that's really how many I suggest you pick is 5, not 10, 5 topics you can own in the market. So there's consistency. And then that allows you to repurpose between those pieces. So say you're writing, usually I think of a blog as the foundation of a content program, but it's not always. That's your center of gravity usually. But you can take your blog or your podcast or your webinar and create all of the things with it. You can create social, you can create a newsletter. So if you write a blog, you should be looking to reuse that for social and newsletter. If you're running a webinar, you should be looking to reuse that to write your newsletter through the transcript and social and blog posts. So it's literally all over the place how you can use that core content in the different types. And you can use AI. So you got a transcript of your webinar, you've got a blog post, you can create custom GPTs to turn that into a newsletter using your brand voice and your preferences. So there are really cool ways to use AI, and then of course you review it. Of course you check it and you review it and you move paragraphs around. But AI can really get you past that deer in the headlights thing where you're like, oh my God, I have this 16-page transcript and I don't know how to organize it and I don't know how to turn it into a newsletter. Yeah, you do. You can use your new best friend, ChatGPT,
Yeah,
to
that's one of the
help you.
best use cases for it. Yeah, you give
Yeah.
it something good, you give it the authentic thoughts and
Mhm.
not where hopefully shouldn't hallucinate based on that and turn it into something really great. I
Right.
do think, and I've been on this kick for a minute too, of sometimes I think it is okay and you actually should find moments where the newsletter is the content you create first. You think
Sure.
about how to write that meat or something really compelling in that education in your note or however you want to set it up. And then from that research or how you craft it, turn that into social posts, write a longer form blog about it, write,
Yes.
create, do a video based on kind of where you want to be and let the newsletter kind of have that its shining moment first with the
Mhm.
original content and then repurpose it in other ways too, because, sometimes you don't want to just regurgitate what they may have seen on your social,
Mhm.
but maybe go the opposite way as
Yeah.
well.
So I like that. And I like the idea of testing ideas. So, like testing an idea on social, because social, you can throw an idea out there. You can get feedback from the market really quickly. And then you're like, people like that, people ask great questions. This is a newsletter or this is a blog post.
Yes.
Yeah. You can use it that way. And you can test your ideas in a newsletter. You can run a poll or a survey in your newsletter.
Yes, it's such a great use case.
Create yourself a flywheel. So you're getting feedback from the market in different ways and then creating content based on what the market tells you and making decisions about what channels you should use for putting that content out there in the market. Yeah. Jeff, I'm pondering your question. Authenticity. Yeah, and as Nicole mentioned below, you're using your newsletter to build the relationship, which means speaking to a specific audience, informing and educating before selling, and inviting people to connect with you directly. I would really consider those the 3 points of how you build relationships through newsletters. So I'll say it again, you're giving people a venue to connect with you directly, access, right? You're personalizing for their pain points. And what was my third? Rats.
I'm trying to think now. I know. I was like, yep, you hit them.
Anybody in the chat remember what the third was? But yeah, you're giving them direct access and you're really personalizing the content for them.
And you're earning the right to sell
You're
at some
earning
point,
the Yeah,
you know?
you're earning the right to sell. You're being that was the third one. You're being useful and informational and not trying to sell them because
Right.
honestly, nobody wants to be sold to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think the testing is a great point. I think sometimes, and we at Composely, hopefully many of you on this call are getting our newsletter, and Postette. Um, it is a kind of tale of two sides here, or coin of two sides of you don't want to rush into a newsletter. Again, there's so many people who do newsletters who rush. And I think you should think about your brand, your audience, what will make you stand out, what will help people really remember who you are and your
Mhm.
unique position in the market. And you
Right.
shouldn't just rush to say, well, let's do a newsletter. So I'm just going to throw it out there and see what
Right.
sticks to the wall. But I also think it's okay to say, we're going to start with a thoughtful, intentional starting point, and it can iterate and evolve over time based on the feedback, based on what's resonating, based on what's getting clicks, based on what's getting engagement, based on what you're hearing from your other channels. And it's okay to let it evolve and not feel like it has to be perfect in order to start.
Sure.
So
Right.
I feel like I'm talking a little bit out of two sides of my mouth, but like, don't just start, be
Mhm.
thoughtful about it, but also recognize it's okay to evolve and iterate with your audience.
That is true of content in general. There are many people I talk to who think it's got to be perfect before I publish. Heck no. People tolerate a couple, grammatical errors.
It's
Just
real. It makes it seem real.
it means it came from a person.
Mhm.
So no, it doesn't need to be perfect, especially social content. Heck, you can delete that. And you can revise, done is better than perfect. You can revise a blog post that you published online. I
Yes.
also want to mention, Nicole, that you should not be using your newsletter for really top of the funnel content. Do not use it to define basic concepts or reflect basic problems in the market. Go a little bit deeper than that in your newsletters because people can answer those questions online.
Yeah, that's a great
What
point.
what they want and what they can get from your newsletter is how you solve problems.
Yes.
They are raising their hands for access to your brain and your processes. They can go elsewhere for the basic what is stuff. So don't think of it as a top of the funnel vehicle. Think of it as a how to or how we vehicle.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
do. You mentioned AI, which was one of our points, obviously, and mentioned a great use case of how to do it. Any pitfalls that you've seen people, especially when it comes to using AI in a newsletter format, that you'd recommend we avoid?
Yeah, well, every time you write something with AI, it pops out the typical style conventions of AI, lots of M dashes. Lately, I'm noticing like short sentences in triple, be bold, period, be fearless, period, be edgy. And so you see that kind of construction. Just upload your company's style document and tell it over and over again to not use those kind of cringy constructions. If you don't have a company style document, now is the time to do
To work
that.
on that, think about it.
That is a massive resource
That's part
for,
of the intentionality of starting a newsletter is you need to know what your point of view is and how you're going
and
to talk about it.
on my website, I have a template for a style guide. If you guys want it in my website, I'm going to type it.
Yes, please. That would
Look
be
at
great.
my resources section. So yeah, shorter is better. I do agree, Kat. Shorter meaning like 500 words. If you've got enough content for 2,000 words, that's 4 newsletters. Just think of it that way. You can, if you just end up writing a long content piece, great, but break it up. Can be probably multiple topics and can be multiple newsletters.
Yeah.
Yeah. There,
Um,
sure, Kat.
well, I was going to say to that point, let's talk a little bit about metrics because I know we're getting close to time. We have a
Yeah.
few more questions, so Lee and I might go into a rapid fire mode here at the end. But obviously, metrics are a big piece. The one
Mhm.
thing I have harped on for a while with email is that with the bots, with the security things in place, some of the tried and true open and click rate is a
Yeah.
little inflated, maybe artificially inflated. And it's not that they're not helpful, but they're maybe not the end all be all of what's actually happening. So, how do you look to measure success of a newsletter for your clients?
Totally. I've got a little list here. Open rate by audience segment, right? If you've got one audience opening more than another, then you're doing better with that audience. Click-through rate for links. Sometimes tools can tell you time spent reading. So if your tool tells you that, that's cool.
And that was when you mentioned this, the how you lay it out with bullet points and things, the more
Now,
skimmable and the easier it is to get to the end, that's always helpful to look at that metric.
reply rate. reply rate for engagement. So if it's clear that you're accessible through replies and that you want people to reply, getting a reply rate is really good. So let me go back for a second. An open rate, 25% is a really good open rate. If you're in the 40s or 50s, you're killing it. There was a major influencer on LinkedIn who said he had one newsletter with 60%,
Wow.
which is great, which means you had a banger subject, a great subject line, but you do not expect it to be that high unless you really, you really happen to nail it.
Thank
Then
you
you
for setting good expectations because sometimes we hear people who talk about those great moments, but it's good to maybe help us, still find what good work looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't expect 100 replies. Expect like maybe three or something
Yeah,
per
three is a great. Those are three people who felt compelled out of their busy day to respond back to you.
to respond. Use UTMs if you're driving to a landing page or to resources to track that in
Mhm.
in the other tools. So, if you're driving traffic to a download or something like that,
Yep.
use UTM so you can track it. So that's all those things together are going to tell you if your newsletter is
Mhm.
a success, your particular edition or your newsletter in general. Yeah.
The other thing I've talked about and have encouraged our team to look at, granted, our name, it's a little unique, is our name is our URL. So we have a higher than average direct traffic
Mhm.
portion of our traffic is direct. But I do think if you are really making an intentional effort and you can track when that intentional effort happens with email or newsletters, I think it's great to also look at or branded organic search traffic and direct traffic because again, someone might not click. Or if you are giving them the meat and it's that zero click content, yes, please use UTM text because when you
Mhm.
can track it, you want to.
Want to.
But if it's not just, oh, I'm going to willy-nilly, Lee mentioned earlier the importance of consistency and having that cadence. I
Mhm.
think it's very fair to also look at those two kind of branded channels. And if you're noticing an increase of that because people are forwarding or because people are resonating and they're getting something out of it, they may not click, but that doesn't mean that you're not enhancing your brand
Right.
with everyone doing it. And so oftentimes we've seen this too. The more brand things we do doesn't always lead to clickable links, but without fail, there is a direct correlation to an increase in branded organic search and direct traffic.
Right.
And you have to
I'm
paint that narrative for your leadership team so that it doesn't sound like, well, our emails only get two responses a year, but look at how organic and direct. Like you have to, again, it's all in how you paint the narrative with your metrics, but I do think there's a pretty good correlation there.
I love it. I am, because I know the time is short, people are probably having to drop. I'm dropping a very simple outline into the chat for a newsletter. So this is a format that you can use to structure your newsletter, and I'm just going to go over it real quick.
Please.
Yeah, an opening point of view, that's your intro. Why are you writing this newsletter? Who's it for? And what's your hot, spicy, spiky opinion?
Yeah.
Things to know, maybe not in this order, but that'd be like maybe some curated reads or links that are relevant to your audience. You can have a little section, things to know. It can be, that's where you could point people back to a relevant blog post, a relevant one, not just your latest one. You can do a little process like inside our brains, inside our process, or something like that. I like a notes from the field or a customer success because that brings
Mhm.
it home about how problems were solved. And then your call to action. Just reply, right back. We love talking about this stuff, right back. So that's an idea of how you could break out a newsletter into sections. You can also just write a letter, like there's not sections, but
Right.
yeah, you can do that. Oh, thank you for dropping the links.
Yes, I was going to say, in case people do have to
Mhm.
drop off, I'll share Lee's LinkedIn and
Mhm.
all these again. But
Mhm.
this has been so great. I've even gotten some notes, even though we prepped and talked about it. There's always just another perspective to learn. So please subscribe to Lee's newsletter there. I also include the link if you're not subscribed to Compose Lee's. We'll keep sharing hopefully good things and following all of these best practices. You mentioned earlier like that 500, and if you
Mhm.
are writing a 2,000 word note, perhaps you think of that as four newsletters instead of one.
Mhm.
Is there a minimum number of newsletters, or is there an ideal cadence that you think you need to follow to make having a newsletter worthwhile? If you're only doing
Yeah.
quarterly, is that enough?
No, one a month is like the minimum. Two a month might be the sweet spot because publishing once a week is hard. For
It
any
is.
content type, it's hard. So I would say two a month, one a month minimum. Otherwise, just you're not ready. If you can't do it once a month, you're
Fair.
not ready. Yeah.
That's fair.
Mhm.
I also think it does depend on the industry, or even if you think about like, I think it's okay to have different types of newsletters, having that monthly of what we've talked about. But if you're in a very seasonal industry, or I think maybe about like some finance things, or if you're doing like a quarterly kind of State of the Union report style newsletter, I think that's okay to have that on top of your monthly newsletter, and those can be different things. And I think you can be creative with your newsletter strategy
Yeah.
with that too.
Yeah, I agree. And people ask me, how should I use my email list outside of writing my monthly newsletter? So your monthly newsletter is like your drip
Mhm.
every Tuesday, every fourth Tuesday, whatever. But then separately, and don't abuse your list, but separately, you can send them like a webinar invite or hey, we've got 5 new features that you're going to love. And I have subscribed to some newsletters and I get product features and promotions every week. I'm like, that is not why I subscribed.
Right. Right.
So I mean, put yourself in the reader's shoes. How much do I want to hear from these people? Do I really want the specs sheets and the list of the blogs they published and those kinds of things?
Well, I was going to wrap us with this last question, but I'll give my thoughts and then pass it over to you. But of course, the question is, how do you drive engagement with, or how do you maintain engagement, if not build engagement? And I do think that database fatigue and just data cleanliness, and we could have a whole discussion on database cleanliness, but
Mhm.
the fatigue is something to think about. And if someone signs up for a newsletter, but then you're giving them that, and then you're giving them 2 to 3 other emails a week on a press release that you won an award because product wants to send something out, because clients want to send something out, because sales wants to send something out. You need to create like a keeper of the database. Like you are the protector of that. Again, they have
Right
raise
of
their hand.
refusal. Yeah.
Yeah, like you need to say this is too much, or you need to be thoughtful on how the narrative comes across. And every time you're in that inbox, you are either earning their trust or you're pissing them off. And you have to
Nothing in
think about that.
between.
I mean, honestly, yeah, like there really isn't an in between there. And so that is marketing. We often are like the defenders of our database and of the market, and you have to be the kind of the veil of what everyone wants to put messages out, and you need to help have that holistic view of the messages going out. But I think part of how you keep engagement is because you're not fatiguing and you are thoughtful about that narrative
Right,
going across what's happening even in between newsletters.
right. Yeah.
But Lee, what are some of your tips for engagement?
Well, the ones that I already mentioned, like having it come from a person and making it real easy for them to write back if they want or engage with you in multiple ways. Um, Surveys are good. And somebody asked a question about surveys that's somewhere in the chat.
Yes, Jeff was saying
Mhm.
how to know kind of what to put in those
Yeah,
surveys or make sure that
yeah.
they are actually engaging.
Use them to gain intel about your audience as to their pain points. So they would be something like, which of the 5 are you struggling with the most? Or which of the 5 do you most want to hear from us about?
Mm.
Or those are 2 examples. So you're giving them the chance to tell you their pain points and what they want to hear about. You're also gaining intel on what those pain points are.
Yes, which can inform future newsletters that in theory should be more engaging because it's something they said they want to learn more about.
Right. Exactly.
This is kind of my last tip, because we just went through a whole newsletter exercise at the beginning of the year, but I do think people don't think enough about their preference center and giving people the offshoot. Sometimes it's something you've inherited and it has never been thought about, or it's just what was there.
Hmm.
But to your point, or it's an all or nothing.
Hmm.
You either are in or you're out and there's nothing in between. And sometimes people might just want to pause. Sometimes they do, like they don't care about your company award news and they just want the meat. Like you need to think about, is it based on cadence? Is it based on topic? But I think actually taking a minute to think about your preference center can drastically change how you can maintain a healthy database.
Along with that, unsubscribes are not bad. If you are writing good content and they unsubscribe, then you were not a fit for them. So don't look at those as a failure or anything like that. Again, if your content is good and people are unsubscribing, it is a signal that you're being clear to your market about who you provide services for.
Also, maybe a signal that you don't have a keeper of the database and you're sending too many emails.
It could be true too. Yeah,
You
there's
know,
different
even
reasons.
if it's all good, it may just be too much.
For that person. Yeah, don't read too much into it. That's my point. Don't read too much into unsubscribes unless like everybody unsubscribes after an addition because you offended
Yeah.
your yeah.
Yes, because you were canceled.
You got
We
canceled.
we covered so much in a very short amount of time. So thank you for your
Of
prep.
course.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us. Any
Mhm.
final things or just kind of a note to leave on?
Yeah, I always try to tell teams to have fun with content. You don't need to fret about publishing perfect content. You can explore your ideas, but the point is to connect with your audience and have fun with it. Explore different writing styles, let different people guest write. Just don't take any of it too seriously.
I love that. And experiment. I mean, I loved
Right.
that you said earlier. It's great to experiment in it
Mhm.
and have some fun with it.
It's okay to experiment. Be silly with your subject headers, use emojis, just A/B test a silly subject line with a,
Yep.
more, I don't
If
know,
there's ever a channel that you can really kind of push the boundary, email is one of them. It is a
email and stuff. Oh,
short-lived, it
mhm.
probably has like a 24-hour SL
Right.
like life cycle in an inbox and you move on. Awesome. Well, I've dropped links to connect with Lee on LinkedIn, subscribe to Lee's newsletter as well as Composely's. We would love to, have you earn you as part of our community.
Mhm.
Thank you all so much. Like I said, we will be sending out the recording in the next day or two, and some of the resources that were talked about. So keep an eye on that. But in the
Yeah,
meantime, Lee, thank you again. It was great. And everyone
sure.
else, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.